Welcome back to Words with Walner. And today we have John Walner, who is our leading Chicago personal injury attorney. And we have a guest today. John, who's our guest?
Today we're excited to share Words with Walner with Aaron Boeder, a leading medical malpractice attorney in Chicago, Illinois, at Salvi, Schostok and Pritchard, which is a Chicago law firm that have been in the Chicago area for over 50 years, representing those people who are victims of medical malpractice. And we're excited to have Aaron come and share his thoughts and ideas of what's going on in the field of medical malpractice law today in Chicago and in the United States.
Thanks for having me.
That's great. How did you guys meet?
Well, I met Aaron. I met the chief lawyer at Salvi, Schostok and Pritchard about 25 years ago at a restaurant in Highwood. We were talking about what's going on in the landscape of personal injury in Chicago, and he asked if his firm and our firm could work together on catastrophic injuries, including medical malpractice. And through working with the Salvi law firm for the last 24 years, I was introduced to Aaron Boeder as one of their young, hot leading lawyers in the field of medical malpractice and catastrophic injuries having to do with trucks and major carriers on the road. And Aaron and I have a warm and beautiful relationship with our families, and watched his, him starting a family, watch his kids getting bigger, and we always talk and meet with each other over lunch and dinner to talk about our families and also our careers and where we are going in medical malpractice and severe catastrophic injuries, and how we can help the community, both of us, to learn about this and to help them achieve justice through money awards. And we're excited to have Aaron. He's a young, fun, and serious and extremely well-known attorney in Chicago.
Great. Well, as you know, one of the things we want to try to accomplish here is we want to be on the side of the consumer. We want the consumer to learn as much as they can from this podcast. So I want to start it out by saying, if any consumer is in a position where they sign off, have their loved one go in for surgery, and they come out of that surgery and they just in their gut know something is not right. And of course, maybe they're obviously not the same. Maybe they can no longer move their limbs. Can you share with the audience what should be the next step?
Yeah, so first and foremost, they need to communicate with their doctors and their nurses what's going on. Dad went in for this surgery, he came out and something's different, and he's complaining of, my arms don't work. They need to tell the doctors right away. But at the same time, if it's a serious, serious problem, his arms don't work, or God forbid he dies during the surgery, something like that, then that'd be the time to reach out to a lawyer like John or myself in order to ask some questions. Because most surgeries you'd expect to come out and be in a good shape, in a good position. But if something goes dramatically wrong, you need to reach out to a lawyer to understand, is this what should have happened? Because what tends to happen is the doctors and nurses will clam up. They won't say, oh, by the way, we did the wrong thing. We shouldn't have gone where we went, and we're so sorry your mother's paralyzed. So you're actually going to see a lack of information about what really happened as they try to circle the wagons, if you will, and get their story straight. Because on the other side, they're preparing for a potential lawsuit.
So what kind of evidence? Should they be starting to collect evidence, or do you leave that more in the hands of the attorney?
If they can, they should write down notes for their lawyer. They can put it in their phone or just handwrite it. But just a couple things not to do. Don't record people without their consent. That's a big problem in Illinois, and it's potentially has some legal ramifications. But you do want to listen carefully to what's told to you, and then take notes about it. So if the doctor says, I shouldn't have clipped that artery that I did, well, then just write that down and tell that to your lawyer. But primarily the lawyers will be doing the research and looking into what happened, usually after your family member gets out of that hospital, because we have to be careful about not negatively influencing the future medical care that a person gets because they think the person has a lawyer.
What happens, most people I think feel like they sign a consent form, right? And consumers feel like when they do that there's nothing that they can really do, but that's not really the case.
Yeah, and with a consent form, first and foremost, if you sign something while you're being rolled into surgery, That is not what a consent form is supposed to be. You're actually supposed to sit down with your doctor and understand the real risk associated with procedure versus the real benefits that you would gain from the procedure. So if you don't have that in-depth, thorough conversation, that consent form really doesn't mean anything, number one. And number two, you could sign a consent form and it says 10, 20 different things that could happen. You could be paralyzed, you could have a stroke, you could die. Well, that doesn't mean it should happen. And what we know is a very, very small percent of the time, any of these bad things happen. So if you have a real catastrophic complication or your family member does, that's when you need to talk to a lawyer right away.
I want to talk about two stories in relationship to what Aaron just said. Me personally, I had tremendous sciatica on my butt, going down to my leg, going to my foot. I couldn't tie my shoes anymore. I couldn't bend over. I couldn't sit down. It was extreme pain. I got an MRI, and I was referred to an orthopedic surgeon to alleviate the pressure that was on my nerve root that was going into my leg. So I never signed any consent form. They heard about as a lawyer. I know my clients have signed consent forms anytime they go under any medical procedure, and it's very harsh against the patient. Like Aaron was just explaining, I have an IV in my arm. I'm prepped with different medicines and anesthesia going into my arm through my body so I wouldn't feel pain, and the doctors can monitor my blood pressure and so on, like any surgery. Then the nurse comes in and says, we're going to use these two electrical wires, and we're going to, during the surgery, I just want you to know that. I said, what for? And she goes, in case to make sure you don't get paralyzed. So if we're too close to a nerve, it'll go through these wires and it'll alert the surgeon to what's going on. And now we want you to sign a consent form that says, hey, it doesn't usually happen, but you could be paralyzed. First, I'm drugged out. I get up at 4:30 in the morning to be there at 6 in the morning to be prepped for surgery. I'm under anesthesia, a kind of a fog. I am so nervous because you're on a gown, you're in a sterile room. You have no one around you because my wife and my children are waiting for me outside of surgery to take me home. And I'm like, what? I'm having electrical wires put on me in case you snap my spine, I'll be paralyzed for the rest of my life? What kind of way is that to sign a consent form? And that's what all consumers are facing in the United States. They're thrown a consent form when they're about to go into surgery. That's how horrible it is. This is true, and it happens always.
And we should let people know that a consent doesn't mean they get to do whatever they want. If you sign a consent form, that doesn't mean you can't sue later. That's not what it is. It's not like you go to the gym and you sign one of these forms. If you drop the weight on your foot, it's your fault. That's not how consent forms work. It's to educate the consumer, but it doesn't prohibit them from suing later. And it's very important. And if you have a consent form that says, we've had this in cases we've done in the past, you might get an infection. And after your surgery, you start developing signs of infection. You get a fever, you have pain. And you call your doctor and say, I don't feel well. I've got a fever. I've got pain. It's a red spot where you did my surgery. The doctor can't, if he says, oh, just ignore it, that's medical negligence. Just because you signed a consent form about infection doesn't mean he can ignore you or she can ignore you. So it's very important that you call right away.
I also feel as a follow-up to a story that Aaron was just saying, one of my biggest medical malpractice victories in my young career was when a woman had a child that was deprived of oxygen during childbirth. And I was gathering all the records, having my experts look at them. But what I forgot to do because I was young is just ask her, what happened? We know we have damages. The baby's brain damage will never be able to participate in life as a person that was born in a proper delivery, whether it was C-section or vaginally. The baby was not coming out. She was dilated. The baby wasn't coming out. So all I was saying is all the medical records can't tell you what really went on because maybe they're not going to notate what was happening exactly during childbirth. And she said, John, here I am struggling. I'm in pain. I didn't feel the baby kicking and moving, and the doctor wasn't in the room, which I felt was strange. And it turned out that the doctor was having sex with the nurse in the next room while she was struggling. And let me tell you something about what goes on in hospitals. This is the truth. Our client was an African American. It was a very fancy hospital at Northwestern, and they were treating other patients with more respect, dignity, and care than they were my client. And that also played a factor into this mother raising a child that is brain damaged and will need millions of dollars for the rest of their life to make this child comfortable and have an easier life into this world. So it was horrible.
That is horrible, John, and it brings up sharing more stories with the audience. So, Aaron, could you share with us that you've won a few cases out there, and tell us more about some of those cases.
Sure. And one case that John and I worked on together was actually came to us right before. So just so people know, you have generally 2 years to file a lawsuit. And if you miss the time, you're done. You can't win. And that's a real big deal. So you need to call lawyers as soon as possible. But there was a case that John sent us in which it had been looked at by 2 or 3 other law firms. And they said no. But John believed in it. And he called me up and said, hey, Aaron, I have this new case. And it involved a young woman who went to the emergency room complaining of a really bad headache and some problems with her vision. And she was young and African American. And they sent her home. And before she left, she says, I can't even read the papers I'm signing to go home. And they said, it's okay. You'll be fine. Just get in your cab, go. She comes back a couple days later. Now she can't see out of either eye. The doctor, a new doctor this time, says, I think you're crazy. But you can still go home. It's just all in your head. Sends her home again. Comes back to the third time. There's a new doctor who finally listens to her. Finds out that there was a clot in her that was preventing her fluid in her brain from draining, such that the nerves in her eyes were being compressed and being killed. She's now in her mid-30s. She's completely blind in both eyes. But John sent us the case a few weeks before the 2-year limit was coming up, and we settled that case with all the different defendants for just under $15 million when it was all said and done. But as after multiple law firms gave up on it, and didn't think it was a case. So that's why it's really important to get to the right lawyers early so that you don't end up going somewhere where they just don't have the sophistication or the ability to look into a case the right way.
So let's talk a little bit about the reverse. What are some examples of cases that people call you about, and that they just these are examples of where there's like really nothing that a law firm can do for them? Maybe because there just wasn't really anybody at fault for what happened, but maybe explore that a little bit more, because I think the audience needs to understand that as well.
The statistics are, we don't take many cases. It's a very small percentage that we take. And why is that? Because we have to prove that someone did wrong, and that wrong caused a very substantial injury. Why is it? Because these are expensive cases to pursue. They're well defended by some of the best defense lawyers in the country, and the hospitals have lots and lots of money to fight against you. So a lot of times people start off the conversation with, I could have died, because they had some complication. They had an infection that was really touch and go for a while, but thankfully the antibiotics saved their life, and they might have been hospitalized for a week or two.
Or a month.
Or a month, or whatever it is. It's something significant, and if it was your own life, you would want someone to take notice of it. But what we know from our experience is by the time you call a lawyer, the case gets filed, it goes through the court system. By the time we get to trial, you may look great. You might look like a regular person. And you go into the jury and we say to the jury, you need to give money to Mrs. So-and-so for that 1 month of her life that was absolutely terrible. But it was 3 years ago, and she's happy and healthy now. And jurors might award some money, but there's a good chance it's less money than we've already spent to bring the case on your behalf. So we have to be, and we're very good at being upfront with people about the cost and the benefits of a lawsuit. And what we want to do is talk to you about it and explain all our different thoughts. And if we can take the case, great, we'll do great for you. And if not, we'll explain why and give you a sense of other avenues. For instance, you can complain to the state of Illinois. You can say, I was disrespected by this nurse. It might not have caused me an injury, but she shouldn't have treated me that way. And we'll give you the phone number or the website to call. So it's really, what it usually comes down to is we take cases involving someone who dies, brain injury for a child like John was just describing, or someone where they lost the arm, or like the young lady that lost her vision. It's things that, dramatically change the quality of your life.
One thing I don't think people realize is where medical malpractice ranks on death. I believe it's in the top 5. Maybe we could talk about that a little bit.
First, what the consumer doesn't know, you go into a hospital, you put your care and trust into a doctor that's going to treat you, and you don't have any qualms over it because the doctor, when you're going to visit the doctor in his office, they have 100 degrees on the wall. Their doctor's wearing a white coat. He seems very professional. The lobby of the doctor's office looks good, and you believe, okay, I respect you, and I think you were the right doctor for me. But did you know that 250,000 people died last year due to medical mistakes, medical malpractice inside hospitals, that it's in the top 5 leading causes of death in America, which is disgusting, right? So you always, of course, make sure that the doctor that's doing the surgery is right for you, and of course, talk to relatives and other doctors who treated you for other things in your life, agree that this is the best doctor for you. I want to talk to you, though, about a case where someone died and the tragedy of it that Aaron and I prosecuted. A young lady was in a daughter, not married, no kids, was in a small car accident, but she blacked out in the accident. They roll her into the emergency room. They do a CAT scan of her brain, and they see a tumor there, and they think this tumor, if it's not operated on immediately, would cause what, Aaron? What did the doctors say?
Basically, she'd start losing function and slowly degrade her life and maybe kill her.
Right. You know what the doctor never did, though? Never talked to the father. Never talked to the siblings. That never said, this is what we're going to do. Never explained if it needs to be done now. We don't need consent. Or not. Never, of course, can consult with our own client who's unable to make decisions for herself. Never talks to the dad. And if they would have talked to the dad for 1 minute on the phone, they would have seen that this was a family inherited condition that wouldn't have caused death, that wouldn't have caused a change in life. They operated on her. She went into a coma for more than a year, right, Aaron? Right. Had to have 24-hour care after she was released from the hospital, released from long-term care, goes to her house, has 24-hour care. This is the love and life of her father. It was the only thing the only thing that he cared for in life was his child. Child died. His life, he couldn't function anymore. The dad, and Aaron and I were present for the funeral, and the most beautiful thing, the only beautiful thing of this whole tragedy was that she donated her organs. I've never, in my life as a lawyer, I've been practicing for 35 years, felt so much sadness out of a human being that the father lost the love of his life, but could no longer function himself, who could not go on, and gave up himself and died.
It's a horrible situation because you see this young lady basically reduced to being an infant. And they never talk to dad. And that's a real concern because while the doctors may know best, they can't tell you what to do. And the dad was adamant that he never would have agreed to this procedure when it was done. And the daughter was basically pushed into it, like John was describing. 7 o'clock in the morning, sign this form, we're going to do this thing, you'll be fine. And the dad got there, was looking for his daughter in her room, couldn't find her, finally finds out she's in the operating room. And what are you talking about?
Yeah.
And by the time he realized what's going on, the doctor comes out. Sir, I'm sorry, there's been a complication.
Oh, boy.
And he's like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
And he never spoke to his daughter again after that day, at least that she could hear. And his life was ruined. And her life as a young lady was just destroyed. So while doctors, they may know a lot, you don't have to do what they say. And you do have a right to second and third opinions. And that's really important for people. If you're not comfortable in the place you're at, go somewhere else. You have that right to seek out someone else. And if you don't know where to go, call a friend, call a relative, call someone like us. We'll give you recommendations so that you're at the right place that can respect you and your needs.
It is incredible the amount of experts that you have to retain on your side to win these cases. And the Salvi and Walner firm had been practicing for over 50 years, and we know every doctor that'll stick up for you in any part of failure to read a pap smear, failure to read a mammogram correctly, prostate exam correctly, fail to take certain precautions based on certain people's underlying conditions to protect them during a surgery. We have a team of nurses and doctors on our side that'll even say whether this is malpractice or not. We don't want to put any family member in a position where they are hoping and praying that the lawyer is going to fight on their behalf and get them the amount of money they deserve. We want to temper their expectations, say, no, we've talked to our doctor from Stanford or Harvard or Mass General, and it appears that the doctor that did this surgery performed everything that was necessary and reasonable under the medical procedures that are known to man at that time. So we advocate for you, but we are also will be honest with you. But if you feel there is something wrong, we could give you the proper direction on what you can do because of this. And you cannot go into this medical malpractice field unless you have and be successful, unless you are respected by doctors across the nation that believe in you and your legal skills and they're willing to testify against other doctors. Like, not many doctors want to testify against other doctors when they believe that Salvi law and Walner law are doing the right thing for the right reasons. They'd be willing to put their reputation on the line in a court in front of ladies and gentlemen of the jury and say that this doctor did not practice the correct medicine for this family. And that's why this person on January 18th, 2002, had 5,000 people at the funeral saying, what happened? Why did it happen? How could it have been prevented? Such a tragedy. Who's going to take care of her children for the rest of her life?
All right. We like to end every episode with Words with Walner, with your last word. All right. So we'll start with Aaron. What's your last word?
It is so important that you're treated with dignity. And it's one thing to have something go wrong, and that's not good. But when there's a wrong and they don't tell you why, that's why most people call us. They're looking for information. They're not looking for money. They're not looking for revenge. They want to know what happened to their mom or their dad or their child. And they don't get answers in the hospital. They don't get answers in the doctor's office. And the only person they get an answer from is us when we've talked to our experts from throughout the country. So the last word is, if you want to know what happened, a lot of times you need to talk to a good plaintiff's personal injury medical malpractice lawyer. That's the only way you're going to find the truth.
Right. Very good. John, your last word.
The last word is, when the family reaches out that believes they were a victim of medical practice, they always ask the doctor or the nurses, who are, their job is to never tell the truth, to cover it up so they won't be hit for millions of dollars. Who could be your best advocate? A medical malpractice attorney. And one of the greatest issues that I want to bring to the audience is communication. If you communicate with your doctor and talk, what are the reasonable expectations for this surgery, and you articulate how you feel, then you could get treated great. But unfortunately, the doctors will, when you get the medical records, if something get wrong, you will find it is replete of what happened. That the communications and the truth are not in the medical records, and that is what is unfortunate. So let a lawyer fight for you to tell you whether you have a case or you don't. And we're blessed to help you, and there is no cost in talking to us ever. And we will point you in the right directions, because experience in medical malpractice matters.
That's a wrap. Thank you so much for joining us with Words with Walner. And stay tuned for next month. We are going to discuss the rideshare and delivery truck. Where do you stand as a consumer? I think many people don't know if you are in an accident in rideshare or a delivery truck from another delivery truck service. Where do you stand legally? And we're going to just discuss all
Well,
that.
let's thank Aaron for coming in today. Aaron Boeder from Salvi Law came in here today. We enjoyed talking to you, and we're honored that you came and shared your wisdom about medical malpractice today. So thank you.
Thanks so much. It's been a pleasure. And one of the highlights of my career has been working with John. So
That was nice. I don't know if that's true.
no, that is true. So thank you.
Thank you, Aaron.